What is up, and welcome to CFB Saturdays. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the Big Ten and ranking every single team in the conference from worst to best, as I believe that it stands here going into the 2026 season. I'm recording this in July, so we're just about 2 months out from college football. So these are my post-spring Big Ten rankings. The second best conference in the country. Don't shoot the messenger. It's just true. Don't hate. But we're going to go ahead and start right at the bottom. But before I do, please make sure that you sit back, relax, like, comment, subscribe. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to this channel. Let's go ahead and get right into it, starting at the very bottom. And I think you guys all know where I'm going with this. I've gone here every year that I've done this and put Purdue here at the very bottom spot. They continue to prove me right every year that I put them at the bottom. So, like I said, I'm doing it again. Will they be better than they were last year? I think probably so. It would be pretty hard to be worse than they were last year. But I think the whole Big Ten continues to get better. And I think the bottom of the conference is getting better too, but not enough to surpass the other teams in the conference that are also getting better. I do like Barry Odom as a coach. I think that he's really good. Honestly, I feel like he's kind of stuck in Purdue. I like the staff they have there, but at the end of the day, I just don't think that they have the roster to compete. They've made some transfer moves. We'll see how those pan out. I think they may improve in the passing game just a little bit, but there are just so many holes in this roster that it really isn't worth breaking down position by position. I expect them to look a little bit better, like I said, than they were last season, which will still put them at the bottom of the barrel in the Big Ten. At number 17, I have Michigan State, and they have been dreadful the past 2 seasons, and I'm not seeing any light at the end of the tunnel for them at this moment. They hired Pat Fitzgerald after he was dismissed from Northwestern, and that's just not a hire that I really like too much. I'm not excited by it. I didn't think he was good at Northwestern. He gave them multiple 3-9 seasons, which isn't great, and I don't think that more resources will be enough to make him a good coach. I don't think he's the kind of guy that will right the ship for the Spartans. One thing is for certain, though, the Spartans will look drastically different. They had a ton of roster churn and brought in a ton of new guys for better or for worse. They weren't great last season, so maybe it is for the better, but it's just another team whose roster I just don't think measures up. There are just so many holes, and there just isn't any bright spots that really excite me. I just don't have a lot of confidence in this team catching its stride this season, so I expect they will continue to be one of the worst teams in the conference. At number 16, I have Rutgers, and unlike the previous 2 teams, there is at least a little bit to like about Rutgers, a little bit of life to be breathed into them. They returned 2 major offensive pieces in KJ Duff and Antoine Raymond at running back. So those 2 offensive players alone put them above the other 2 schools I just mentioned, because those kind of playmakers can take over any given game. They are truly some of the best playmakers in the Big Ten. So I like that, but the rest of the roster is more the same. Lots of holes, lots of question marks. I don't really have any confidence in Dylan Lonergan, who comes from Boston College at quarterback. They got him in the portal. I don't think that he will have nearly the success that Kyle Manis did. And if history repeats itself, the defense will be pretty atrocious. Plus, there's just not a lot of resources at Rutgers, so don't have too high of expectations for them. At number 15, I have Maryland. And I've had a pretty tricky relationship with Maryland the past few seasons. I've been fooled by them before. I'm not going to be fooled by them this year. But the past few teams on this list, I would have told you, have really solid to good staffs. Well, I guess that's not technically true. I didn't say that about Michigan State. But anyways, I would say that a lot of those teams have solid staffs, but are lacking the roster talent. And while there are plenty of holes in the Maryland roster, their biggest concern is actually their staff, and more specifically their head coach. I am not a Mike Locksley believer. He kind of lost my trust the past few years after I did believe in him, and he didn't deliver when he had a good roster. However, I do think that the roster that they have is markedly better than the rest of the teams we talked about so far. They retained Malik Washington at quarterback. They retained Sidney Stewart on defense. And they picked up some very promising talent like 5-star Zion Lee in the recruiting cycle. So don't get me wrong, there are plenty of holes in this roster, like I said, but I think overall that level of talent is higher than the teams we've talked about in the past, but I think that Locksley will hold them back from reaching whatever potential they do have. At number 14, I have Illinois. And coming into last season, Illinois had the highest returning production in the country, which was great and led to a pretty successful season, even if it was less than I was expecting from them. But this year, they don't have any of that. They lost a ton of that production. Only 7 starters remain. They're pretty much starting completely fresh on defense. They lost most of their productive O-linemen, and the best quarterback they've had in a long time, and Luke Altmaier, he's gone too, as well as their top 2 tight ends. Added staff churn, and they are switching defensive schemes to a 3-3-5, which hasn't been that successful recently in the Big Ten. So lots of change for the Illini, lots of change that I don't really like. They have not proven to be a program that can just reload with the big guys. So I am expecting a rebuild year, especially since I don't trust the quarterback they have there in Caden Hauser. However, I think Brett Bielema has proven his merit as a coach for Illinois. The Illini have brought in some guys that I think should make an impact, even though they lost a lot of the guys that they had. The roster is still a lot more stable and deep than the lower teams in this conference, and I'm pretty sneaky high on their secondary, so I expect a rebuild, but I do not expect a total collapse. At number 13, I have Northwestern, and they are pretty interesting to me because they brought in Chip Kelly at OC, which I think is a dang good hire for them. We have seen him very recently win a national championship with Ohio State, and I think that's just a slam dunk for a team like Northwestern. But I'm not really sold on the quarterback they have in Aiden Childs that they brought in. He seems very inconsistent, and I just have not been impressed with his game in the past. Maybe Chip Kelly is exactly what he needs to be improved, but I don't know if I see it, but I do think overall this team should be improved. There aren't major glaring holes on the roster, but there also aren't a lot of superstars either. I think Northwestern will be the definition of fine. At number 12, I have Wisconsin. And it still baffles me to this day that Luke Fickell has not worked out there. I thought he was a slam dunk hire when he got there, and it just has not worked out at all. You can blame it on injuries or whatever else you want to, but at some point you have to shut up and prove it, and he just hasn't done that yet. This year, there's once again reason for hope and for improvement. In fact, I do believe Wisconsin will be better this year simply because of the quarterback transfer they got in Colton Joseph from Old Dominion. I think he was an incredible pickup for the Badgers, and he isn't the only guy Wisconsin picked up in the portal either. He's just one of the 33 guys that they got. So they basically said out with the old, in with the new. This Wisconsin team will look completely different, but will that show up in the win column? I don't know yet. I surely think that they're going to have a better offense with Colton Joseph at the helm, especially if they play into his strengths as an RPO guy, which I do expect them to do. And I actually do like their defensive roster. So there's a lot of hope, like I said, for Wisconsin to emerge from the bottom of the conference this season. They have the potential to jump even higher, I think, but it's more of a believe it when I see it kind of thing, since Fickell has regressed every year that he has been with the Badgers. At number 11, I have Minnesota. And under PJ Fleck, Minnesota has been very solid. They haven't been great or terrible, just solid. And I expect more or less the same this season, although I do think that they have a higher ceiling and a sneaky potential this season that a lot of people aren't expecting. They're kind of flying under the radar a bit, but I really do like the makeup of the team. Drake Lindsey is a high potential quarterback that can be dangerous if he can put everything together. The offensive line is loaded with veterans. They added in some nice receivers too through the transfer portal. They still have Anthony Smith on the defensive end, and he can just wreck games. So there's a lot to like, but there's also a lot to be skeptical about. I don't feel great about their ability to run the ball, and a lot of those veteran pieces that they have, I like from last season. They under-delivered despite their potential. So hopefully with that injection of new talent, that'll be the difference for them. Because if those guys don't develop, that's going to be more of the same for Minnesota. At number 10, I have Nebraska. And the Matt Rule experience in Nebraska has been pretty underwhelming up to this point. Dylan Raiola was supposed to be the savior, but he never really got things going, and now he's off to play backup at Oregon. So Emmett Johnson, their star running back, he's gone as well. They did bring in Anthony Calandria from UNLV, who I think actually elevates Nebraska's immediate playmaking ceiling, although he can be very inconsistent. Outside of those key positions, though, I think that this may be the best roster Matt Rule has had since he's been there. I think the offensive line rivals some of the best in the conference. The question really lies on what they can put together on defense and whether they can be consistent enough on offense. I don't think Nebraska is a team with a super high ceiling overall, but I think that they can be a thorn in your side and can pull an unexpected upset somewhere along the line. At number 9, I have UCLA. And Bob Chesney is the new head coach there. It seems like he is modeling the Curt Cignetti way of doing things, all things considering. That's not a bad model to go by, considering he's won a national title in his first few years with Indiana. But if you don't know what I mean, Chesney was previously the coach at James Madison, which is also where Kurt Cignetti was the coach of before he went to Indiana. And he's bringing all the guys from James Madison to UCLA, just like what Cignetti did after he left James Madison to go to Indiana. I hope that made sense. I'm definitely not expecting the same level of success from Chesney, but I'm also less hesitant that guys from James Madison can compete in the big leagues because I was proven wrong already on that front. Plus, I've always been a believer in Nico Iamaleava. He has let me down a bit last season, but I still think it's a ton of potential, and I think that we will see more of that come through this season after 2 full seasons as an experienced starter. So even though UCLA left a lot to be desired last season, I'm very optimistic that the players from James Madison coming over paired with Nico will lead to major improvement for the Bruins, and I also like the improvements they made on defense. Basically, I think UCLA got a major upgrade in staff and in roster, but they are relying a lot on some transfers, which could go either way. We'll see how it pans out, but I have a decent amount of faith that UCLA will be better than people expect, and definitely better than they were last season. At number 8, I have Penn State. After an abysmal coaching search that looked like it was going to go completely south for Penn State, set them back for years to come, they somehow came out on top with one of the best coaching hires of the cycle in Matt Campbell. I think he was criminally underrated, and I can't believe someone else didn't pick him up first. But this honestly just feels like Iowa State is moving into the Big Ten now with an upgraded roster because Campbell brought everyone with him. That's, quarterback Rocco Becht, who's a major upgrade. But then you also have some key players who stayed at Penn State. So like I said, really, it just feels like a more talented version of Iowa State. The question is, how does that pair up against the competition they're playing in the Big Ten? Because for my money, if you put Iowa State last year in the Big Ten, I don't think they're going to be up at the top. But we're talking about a team that went 8-4 in arguably the weakest conference in the country, getting transported into arguably the best conference in the country, or second best if you're me and you're smart, or just a delusional SEC homer like me, but I didn't say that. Anyways, there is nuance to the discussion because Penn State has more resources and better facilities than Iowa State does, which absolutely can help your program. But the level of athlete is largely the same, and while I think eventually Matt Campbell will crush it at Penn State, I think this year will just be a steady team, pretty much. I think they'll be a tough out, but I don't think that they will be challenging the top spots of the conference this year. At number 7, I have Iowa. And I think they are probably the most consistent Big Ten team. They always give you pretty much the same season, or the same thing, really, which is a decent season with abysmal offense and a stellar defense. Now, the offense did provide a little spice last season, but the sentiment was mostly the same. This season they lose most of the defensive production than I think anyone else in the conference. But until proven otherwise, I never worry about Iowa on defense under Kirk Ferentz because they just always reload. So I think they'll be just fine on defense. The question is, does Tim Lester's offense continue to make improvements after it has kind of steadily improved every single season, even though they lost their quarterback, Mark Gronowski? Honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. They did not get a new quarterback through the portal, so it seems like Jeremy Hecklinski will be taking the reins. And while he looked good in the spring game, I don't really know what to expect. I was really high on Gronowski last season, so I don't know if he's going to be as good as Gronowski. But the bar at Iowa for quarterback is pretty low, so we'll see. They did have some major names along the O-line return, which can be a huge part of the offense continuing to improve. But at the end of the day, there's a lot to replace on both sides of the ball. But I think that we will get another successful season from the Hawkeyes where they may even flirt with a playoff spot. So we'll see. Number 6, I have Washington. And despite an ugly attempt to exit, DeMond Williams is back at quarterback. And if he plays like he did last season, that is a problem for anybody who lines up on the other side of the ball from him. Last year, I called Washington a 3-headed monster because they had an elite quarterback, elite wide receiver, and an elite running back. It was a trio that was just unreal. Well, now that trio is down to just a quarterback, but I think overall the aggregate of that offense should still be really good this season despite losing those heavy hitters. The offensive line retains 4 starters, and they have the size and experience to be a force this upcoming season. And there are some pretty promising transfers and rising stars that I think will surprise a lot of people. Defensively, they do have a lot of guys that are gone, but I still really like the pieces that they have. In fact, I think the defense is quietly loaded for them. I think they may even be better than they were last season. There is a lot of variability with Washington to me, and I think a big part of that is the locker room. How will the team play for a quarterback who tried to leave, and how will the quarterback play for a team that he wanted to leave? That's the kind of stuff that's impossible to really predict in the preseason, but it is important to call out. I have a lot of faith in the coach Jed Fish in Washington as a program. So while there are a lot of questions and holes for me right now, I have a little bit more blind faith in them than I may have for some other teams that were further down this list. At number 5, I have the Michigan Wolverines. Sherrone Moore is out after all the craziness that happened in the offseason, and they ended up bringing in Kyle Whittingham from Utah, which I think is a home run hire for him to take the helm as head coach. With him comes a ton of players and integral staff members as well that give me a lot of faith in what Michigan can achieve this year. If you look at Kyle Whittingham's track record, his Utah team's constantly overachieved. At Michigan, he has more resources, more talent, and exposure. So I think it's fair to be excited for what the future of Michigan will be like, and even the immediate season for Michigan. But when you bring in new staff, there can also be a lot of growing pains. It's a lot of change happening all at once for Michigan, so getting acclimated isn't always easy, but I do think that the grass is greener on the other side. So what does Whittingham have to work with this season at Michigan? Well, first and foremost, he gets Bryce Underwood, and a lot is riding on his shoulders. He started last season. It was a bumpy road, but the ultra-talented freshman showed some real flashes of greatness, and I expect a pretty significant leap for him this season with a new offensive scheme paired with the experience he got from his full first season. I think he could be a truly special player, especially if they let him play looser like I expect them to. Around him, the weapons seem to be more favorable than what Michigan had last season, or for the past few seasons, honestly. As usual, it looks like Michigan will be have a really strong 1-2 punch in the ground game. The offensive line should be a really great physical unit, and more surprisingly, I actually do like the wide receiver room they have. So that could do a lot for what this Michigan team was lacking in the past few seasons with that passing game. On the defensive side of the ball, they once again look like one of the best defenses in the conference and in college football. So to me, Michigan will go as far as Bryce Underwood can take them. If he does take a leap and develops how I expect him to, Michigan could be back at the head table of the Big Ten. But if he has more of the same this season that he did last season, I think it'll be a tough road for the Wolverines. I personally think that Michigan is a team that may look pretty rocky at the start, but as the season continues, I think they'll be more accustomed to the changes and they will get significantly better. So hopefully that moment doesn't come too late for them, but I'm expecting big things from the Wolverines. Number 4, I have USC. And this year will be a very decisive crossroads for USC. A few years ago, Lincoln Riley made the decision to focus on making his offense less flashy and more physical, which has been a pretty slow process that felt necessary for the Trojans since they were getting manhandled by teams they faced with more physicality, which made it a pretty poor fit for them to be in the Big Ten where most teams are big and physical. Something had to change, but up until last year, that transition did not seem to be yielding successful results. But last year, they finally started to compete and even beating some of those physical teams. So this year, I think it's a big prove-it year for them. They have more returning starters than anyone in the country. They bring back a Heisman candidate in quarterback Jaden Mayava. And even though he lost his favorite targets, he is playing in a Lincoln Riley system where quarterbacks just flourish. So I think offense will be humming. Plus, they bring in an incredible freshman class, which will obviously help them this year and down the line. They're also bringing in a Hall of Fame coach in Gary Patterson to coach the defense. Expectations are really high and for good reason, but they are going to need to continue to see upward progression in the trenches, both in quality and in depth. We need to see them beating more physical teams on the field like we saw when they played Michigan last season, and they're going to need to show up in those big games in a way they haven't before. USC has felt like they are just a few tweaks away from being truly special. I think this year is their best chance that they've had under Riley to finally be on the right track, even if they don't have the guys like Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane to throw to that I loved from last season. At number 3, I have Ohio State. Now, I know that's a little bit lower than they are usually at, and they are really, really good. I mean, what needs to be said? They have a Heisman finalist quarterback, Julian Sayin, who's back. They have maybe the best player in college football right now in Jeremiah Smith back at receiver. I really like Bo Jackson at running back. They are pretty much elite at the skill positions. But it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. They lost some elite talent to the NFL, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Arvell Reese, Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, Cade McDonald. A lot gone, and also they lose Cornell Tate on the offense. So it's a lot to replace, and these were huge difference makers. 4 of the top 11 picks in the NFL draft were Ohio State players, so those are going to be really hard shoes to fill. Now, we know that Ohio State is elite at talent acquisition and development, so we know that they can reload with the best of them. They do it every single year, it seems, but still, it's impossible to talk about this team without addressing those losses at least. Speaking of losses, they also lost Brian Hartline at OC, which felt like a pretty big hit. They also replaced him with Arthur Smith, who was a pretty questionable choice in my opinion. I wasn't thrilled about his career in the NFL, but college is a whole different sport, so we'll see how he pans out for the Buckeyes here. I think his offensive style is a bit of a head scratcher for me when you consider the offensive scheme at Ohio State. I just don't think it's suited for what Arthur Smith brings to the table, since Ohio State's O-line is probably their weakest link and the receivers are their biggest strengths, which is kind of opposite of how Arthur Smith likes to coach his offenses. They do retain their awesome DC Matt Patricia though, so they maintain some continuity on a defense that loses a lot. I know that sounds like a lot of skepticism and possible questions for Ohio State, and it really is, but they have also earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to answering those big questions in the preseason. They are one of the best teams in the country at reloading talent, like I said, and the fact that they have 4 of the top 11 picks in last year's draft is just proof of how good they are at that talent evaluation. So I'm almost positive they will have the guys to step up that you may not even be aware of, and the guys they brought in from the transfer portal should make a huge impact as well, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I know it's a bit of a hot take to have Ohio State this low, considering I think they may have the best quarterback wide receiver combo in the country and a nasty defense, but the Big Ten is loaded this season, and I have more questions about Ohio State than I do about the few other teams I have ahead of them. At number 2, I have Indiana. And I'm very conflicted about this position for this team. On one hand, you have got to put some respect on the reigning national champs. I refuse to underestimate them again, but maybe putting them at number 2 is underestimating them again. Who knows? They have the best coach in college football on the sidelines in Curt Cignetti. He has been at Indiana for 2 years now, and both were absolutely historic seasons for the program. The first year, they got a CFP appearance and an undefeated national championship in year 2, so what's next? Last year, I sat here and talked about the players that left Indiana, and I talked about their lack of high-level talent, and I had them towards the middle of the pack, which was higher than a lot of people had them, but clearly not high enough. So even though on paper their roster isn't as star-studded as Oregon's or Ohio State's, and even though they lost a ton of talent and experience to the NFL, I just can't fade this team. As long as Cignetti is there, I'm going to blindly believe they can do anything with any roster. Plus, they retained both coordinators, and I think the staff will squeeze every last drop of potential and production out of the guys they have there. I think culture at Indiana has reached new levels. I think Indiana as a powerhouse is here to stay. I think they are a program that will be reloading this season, not rebuilding. I think the new names that you don't even know are going to come out of just literally nowhere, because Cignetti has proven that he can do that. He can take players from James Madison and turn them into national champions. So he can win a championship that's devoid of 5-star players altogether. So yes, they lost Heisman winning quarterback Fernando Mendoza, and they lost a lot of other guys who made this team special last season. But like I said, I think they are hidden monsters on that. There are hidden monsters on that roster. And if you watch my videos last year, you know I was really high on Josh Hoover, who they are bringing in from TCU to play quarterback. So I think he's going to be a great addition to this Hoosier offense. Now, I don't expect him to fill Mendoza's shoes by any means, but he's a very capable passer that will be dangerous in this offense. And if you remember, I was not super high on Mendoza when he transferred to Indiana, so I have a lot of faith that Hoover is in good hands to maximize his potential. Plus, Indiana retains both coordinators, like I said, and some other key pieces that will keep Indiana dominant. So I could 1,000,000,000% see Indiana holding another national title next year at the end of the season. They are definitely going to be good enough once again to do that, but there is just one team in this conference that I think has the roster too talented to ignore, and I think maybe just a little bit better, and that's my number 1 team, Oregon. And in my opinion, they have the deepest roster in the Big Ten and maybe the best roster on paper in the entire country. Most of the concerns I have against Oregon last season were that they were too inexperienced, but they retained most of that roster, and now they have at least a full season of experience under their belts, including a playoff run. I think this is the best roster Oregon has had under Dan Lanning, and that is saying something considering they have had some pretty crazy rosters the past few years. Dante Moore, he made the mature decision to stay back, which is huge for the Ducks. He's going to be play quarterback for them. He was already a great quarterback, and he would have been the second quarterback in the NFL draft taken probably if he went last season. So retaining him at Oregon is a massive win. I think he will have some real progression this season and make him an even better quarterback. I think that they also have great depth at that position. Their backup is Dylan Raiola, who was good enough to start multiple seasons at Nebraska. He was a 5-star recruit. So even if Moore goes down, they will still have an ultra-talented player behind him that can keep the ship steady. I also have a lot of trust in Dan Lanning. He has had the Ducks knocking on the door several years in a row now, and I think he could do they could finally make it this year and break down that door. They have all the right pieces to be electric again on offense. I love what they have on the O-line. Evan Stewart should be healthy and ready to go, along with a variety of other dangerous weapons that they have. They did lose Kenyon Sadiq, who was a huge weapon, but overall, I think they should be a better offense just across the board, really. And on defense, they may have the best D-line in the conference. So it is worth pointing out, though, that they did lose both coordinators, but they promoted from within, which should keep that continuity. I just like Dan Lanning a lot, and I think this year is his year to take an ultra-talented roster and take them to the top of the conference and maybe even the top of the country. So that is all for my Big Ten post-spring rankings. Let me know how I did in the comments, if you love it, if you hate it, whatever. I'll be here again doing the next conference in just a few days, so stay tuned. Peace.